This will complete Chapter 2. That's a risky bet. Looky here, Jim, you ain't gonna find trappers and such settin' in no valley. You're gonna find burgaways. You sure savvy how to live amongst burgaways? Those are all the people traveling in the covered wagons. Jim stared at him, suddenly uneasy, and then he shrugged it off. Savvy, why? You show me a burgaway I can't out-hunt and out-ride and out-trap, and that ain't quite what I mean. Rivers heaved a long sigh and straightened, knocking out his pipe. He looked up, his keen blue eyes gentler than Jim had ever seen them. Hoss, I hope that medicine of yours is thunderin' big. I'm thinking this ain't going to be no easy trail for you to follow. I ain't never whined for things to be easy. Well, I know that, Hoss. Tom studied it a moment longer, then with his usual slow grin caught up to fetch his buffalo hot robe. All right, you knife-throwing coyote, go at it. I reckon you'll make out. Jim grinned back at him, feeling relieved. He pulled the grizzly hide robe from his pack, and they lay down with their feet to the fire, wrapping themselves against the cold of the coming night. Jim took a long look at the familiar humped shape of Tom's big shoulders under the buffalo robe beside him, and then rolled to his back and watched the stars prick out one by one until they spangled the whole sky. That's the last time, he kept thinking. Tomorrow we'll be going different ways, and I'll never lay like this here again. Long after he thought Tom was asleep, he heard his voice from the depths of the robe. All the humor was gone from it now. Anyways, Hoss, I reckon there just ain't no easy trail leading down now the mountains. With the beaver all gone, the good old days is about over for you and me both. Chapter 3. Jim slept fitfully. At daybreak next morning he was off upstream to lift his traps. As if to underscore Tom's bleak words of last night, 5 of them were empty. But as he came to the place where the big mud-plastered lodge where he had set the 6th one, he saw the trap pole was gone. He swore under his breath, then splashed into the water and peered about him in the gray half-light for the float stick. To snare one finally and then have it get away? It was an anxious few minutes before he spotted the stick, bobbing in a little eddy between 2 rocks, several yards downstream. By the time he had explored the bottom of the stream for 5 feet around it and finally located the trap, he was soaked from head to foot and all but frozen. But he was grinning as he hauled his beaver to the bank. Ooh, it was a prime catch. It weighed 60 pounds if it weighed an ounce and had the finest pelt he had ever seen. Oh, a good omen. He made short work of skinning it and hurried, shivering, back to camp. Tom was there ahead of him, roasting buffalo ribs for breakfast. Any luck, Hoss? He drawled. 1, a good un. How about you? 6 empties. Jim bent to tousle Mokey's ears, feeling unhappy. Tom should have got one too this morning, just for a good sign. Listen, Tom, you take that plue. Why, not much. I got too much to pack around as is. Come on, get some grub, you coyote. With an uncertain smile, Jim did as he was told. He felt a little embarrassed in Tom's presence after all that talking last night, and he ate in silence. But Tom paid no attention to that. His eyes were as bland and as his drawl, as careless as ever. While Jim set about rough curing the beaver pelt, he gathered his possibles and began breaking camp as if this was the same as any other morning in the world. Jim's clothes were dry by the time he had the plume stretched on its willow hoop. He left Tom to quench the fire and went to free Buckskin from her stake. She was eager to be gone. She'd been stamping and snuffing the wind restlessly and tossing her wild white mane, murmuring under his breath to soothe her. He strapped on the apishmore, the buffalo hide blanket he used for a saddle. With the last caress of her sleek neck, he whistled Mokey to guard her while he dealt with the mule. Rivers watched out of the corner of his eye, grinning as he tightened Tucky's cinch. Bad Medicine had already emerged from the thicket and was standing with apparent docility beside the pack. But at the first touch of Jim's hands, He flattened his long ears, bucked his middle, and aimed it, a kick that would have broken a man's leg had it landed. Tom's laugh burst out as Jim, used to the ways of mules, and of this one in particular, merely leapt clear, muttering a few remarks in the crow tongue that would have singed holes in anything less tough than a mule hide. Tom strolled over, still shaking with laughter. Here, Hoss, I'll blind that there primer donner for you this morning, seeing as it's the last time I get to see the show. He did so quickly and efficiently with a strip of old blanket. By some mysterious mulish logic, this convinced Bad Medicine that he was a pack mule instead of a spoiled beauty, and he stood quite still while Jim cinched the pack in place. I'm going to miss that critter, Tom chuckled. By Gore, you can have him then. Jim grinned and whipped the blindfold off, and then with a last look around, vaulted to Buckskin's back. She was in swift motion almost before he was seated, and Bad Medicine, who loved her with that mad devotion possible only to a mule's heart, kept close behind as they started down the mountainside toward the Powder River. Good day for hunting if we was to spot an elk, Tom remarked. Looky here. Mokey's at it already. Tom glanced down at the dog running along in front, tail aloft and nose to the ground. Go find us an elk, Mokey, he urged. Go on, get at it. Mokey looked up absently out of his yellow eyes. His mind was on rabbits. Oh, well, I'm full anyhow, Tom drawled and laughed. It was so much like any other day, and yet it was the last. With every hoofbeat, the final minutes of this good, familiar life were running out. The parting with Tom was drawing nearer. They feigned indifference, both of them, until they descended the last slope and pulled up on the flat stretch beside the river. Best let the hosses breathe a minute, Jim mumbled. He was feeling oddly short of breath himself. Yeah, Tucky's plumb winded. They sat in silence for a while, looking at the river, the wind in the treetops, the rumpled manes of their horses, anywhere but at each other. But finally Tom turned. Hoss, this is where I head south. I reckon so, Tom. You startin' you don't want to come along with me? Jim hesitated in spite of himself, and then his hand crept to his pouch, in which rested that powerful paper, and he shook his head. Well, Tom wheeled Tucky close to Buckskin's flank and thrust out his hand. Jim gripped it with all his strength. Hoss, said Tom very softly, take good cur of that medicine of your'n, you hear? Then he was gone, trotting swiftly through the leafless underbrush and yellowed grass, the familiar jangling of his traps growing fainter, his straight back and battered old hat smaller and smaller with distance. Jim watched until he had a wooded bend in the river hid him from view, and then he swung Buckskin's head northwest, toward the Blue Mountains, beyond which lay the Dalles, and, with some luck, some white trader who could read writin'. It took all his will to bring his heels against the mare's flanks and the kick that would commit him, once and for all, to this strange new course. But once it was in motion, it seemed as though he could not go fast enough. Something over a week later, it would have been less had he not been forced to stop and hunt, he reined Buckskin in on a promontory overlooking the Dalles of the Columbia. There below him boiled the mighty river, thrashing and foaming between its towering black walls as it plunged into the cleft it had carved for itself through 50 miles of solid rock. This was the Columbia Gorge, most used passageway through the Cascade Mountains to the broad and fertile land bordering the Willamette River on the other side. Close at hand, to the west, rose to the Cascades themselves, shining with snow, impassable except at the gorge even for horsemen this time of year. Difficult enough last summer when Jim and Tom had wandered over briefly in a vain search for new trapping grounds. And back to the east stretched the 2,000 man-killing, beast-killing miles wagons must travel to reach this spot from the States. There were wagons here now, not many of them. Jim could see them clustered there far below, in the last nook short of the actual rapids, crowded about the dark spots that were the few buildings in the settlement of the Dalles, They looked like stubby gray grubs around chips. Jim started down the timbered slope, half eager, half frightened at the sight of those battered canvas tops. In another half hour he was threading his way among them through a light misting rain, toward the largest of the log buildings, the trading post. As he rode, hands busy with his nervous mare, his eyes darted among the crowds of immigrants who were everywhere he looked, huddled over campfires, tending oxen, clustered in groups to look fearfully at the thundering river. Jim found himself breathing hard, or else forgetting to breathe at all. So many people! Not mountain men or Indians or Mexicans like Tao, but burgoways from the States, folks dressed in fabrics instead of skins, wearing shoes and coats instead of moccasins and blankets and furs. Families, women and children. He stared at them with sudden hunger, his pulse racing with the half-forgotten, half-familiar look of them. He had not seen a white woman or a child for 9 years. They were staring at him, too, curiosity briefly erasing the lines of weariness from their faces as he passed. Outside the trading post, he tethered his animals to the rail and spoke sharply to Moki, who was bristling with suspicion and trying to keep an eye on all 200 or 300 of the nearest burgoways at once. Jim shared his uneasiness. His mouth was dry, and he was sweating in the grisly cloak which had barely kept off the bitter wind 10 minutes before. He shucked it off and flung it over Buckskin's back. Then, with a last hesitating glance around, he tucked his rifle focus it. There. He tucked his rifle into the crook of his arm and stepped into the post. There were burgoways here, too. The place was full of them. He flattened himself against the door as a group of them hurried past. A sandy-haired young man and a woman, accompanied by a stub-nosed boy of about 11 with a mass of blonde ringlets. The child stumbled as he went by and half fell against Jim, turned to pipe, "Excuse me," and stopped short to stare with great wondering gray-green eyes. Jim stared back, fighting a purely Indian impulse to touch and finger that unbelievable yellow hair. Then the boy was gone, darting after his companions. Jim stepped inside, dodged another couple, and moved slowly toward the wooden counter. One quick glance located the trader, the same one who had been here last summer. "Hello, Harris," Jim said in a voice that shook a little in spite of his best effort. He felt all those people were staring straight at him, though his common sense told him they were busy with their own affairs. He swallowed and forced carelessness into his quiet tone. "I was wondering, can you read writing?" "Yep, good as a professor." Harris, busy measuring out a length of calico for a huge red-bearded man, didn't look up. "But I only tried out my learning for them as makes it worth my while. You got any—" Then he did look up and stopped dead, his coarse, beefy face twisting with surprise. "Well, if it ain't Injun Jim," he roared, dropping the calico. "Say, you ain't come back to finish off poor old White Bear, have you?" "Who's White Bear?" muttered Jim. He was rigid with self-consciousness. At the man's bellow, every head in the room had turned in his direction. "Why, my old Chinook, White Bear. He's been a tolerable good Injun since you dropped around to teach him his manners last summer, and he's the best canoeer I got. Leave him keep his hair." Jim didn't like the trader's laughter.